Okay, so we've seen in the last two videos how to do different mathematical operations using Google Sheets and also how to express numbers in different formats like scientific notation using Google Sheets as well. This one here is going to look at something a little bit more complicated, which is absolute and relative references. And we're going to do that by looking at the scenario of having to construct a spreadsheet to simulate a compound interest investment. So you would have learnt about this maybe this year, definitely last year, but if you remember, a compound interest investment is when you take a certain amount of money, put it into an investment account with a bank, and then every year they're going to pay you a certain amount of interest on how much money is in the bank at that time. So in this case here, we start off with $10,000 and we leave that $10,000 in this investment account for 20 years. At the end of each year, they're going to pay you 3.5% of however much is in the bank account at that time, and then add that onto the balance. So you'll have extra money in there because you've been paid interest by the bank. And then the percentage stays the same each year, but then as you've got more and more money in your investment account, 3.5% of that will get bigger and bigger as well. So the interest will grow or compound over time. So if you have the money, it's actually a pretty good way of making your money work for you rather than just having it sit in the bank and do nothing. So what we want to do here is do a spreadsheet that's going to show for this particular investment how much money they have at the end of each year and then how much money they'll have in total at the end of 20 years. So I've kind of got it set up already. I've got a column for the time in years, a column for the principal, which is what we call the amount of money that's in the bank at the beginning of each year, the interest charged each year, and then the balance, which is how much you've got in your bank account after you've added on that extra interest. So it's basically how much you have in the bank at the end of that year. And then over here, I've got spaces for the interest rate as a percentage and the initial principal, which is how much we start off with. So I can do that now. I can put, if I read the text of my question down here, my interest rate is 3.5%, and my initial principal is $10,000. Okay. Next thing would be to put in the time in years from 1 year all the way up to 20 years. So like we saw in our first video, I'll just do 1, 2, 3 years, and then from there I can go in, highlight those cells, go to the bottom right hand corner so my cursor turns into a little black cross, and then click and drag. So now I've got 20 years. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So the reason I've kind of set it out like this, where I've got the interest rate over here and not in the main part of the spreadsheet, and the initial principal over here and not the main part of the spreadsheet, is once I set the spreadsheet up, let's suppose that I want to change one of the conditions in my simulation. Like I want to say, well, what would happen if I had a different interest rate, or I started off with more or less money? How would that affect how much money I earned as interest? Well, I can just change the numbers here and here quickly, and that'll change the whole spreadsheet if I set it up properly. So the initial principal is how much I start off with, which will be the principal at the beginning of year 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit equals here, and then I'm going to click here where my initial principal is and hit enter. So for this first one here, it'll look in cell F3, and whatever is in F3 goes in there. So if I change this to $12, that changes to $12. All right, so I've got that set up. Next thing I need to do is put in the interest formula, right? So the way I work out the interest is I use this formula here. So the interest charged at the end of each year will be the principal, which is how much you have at the start of the year, times the interest rate as a percentage, multiplied by time, which in this case will be 1 year because you're paying the interest at the end of each year, and then divide by 100 because our interest rate, which was a percentage, needs to be changed to a decimal, and you change from percentage decimal by dividing by 100. So that's my formula. So a couple of things here. I need to do the top part separately to the bottom part, so I'm going to type in equals. I'm going to do a little bracket there. Inside my bracket I'll put the top part, principal times interest rate multiplied by time, and then the bottom part, divide by 100, I can just do that. Remembering that the slash sign means divide. Okay, so first part, the principal is this cell here. So I'm just going to click on that cell there, It's the principal times the interest rate, which is in that cell there, and then just times that by 1. In fact, I probably don't even need to put that in, do I? I'll just do that. So that'll calculate how much interest I have at the end of that first year. So 3.5% of $10,000 is $350. So at the end of the first year, I've earned $350 in interest. And then the balance is how much I have at the end of that year, which will be how much I started off with, 10,000 plus the interest I earned, 350. So I'm going to go equals the principal, so I click on that cell, plus the interest, so I click on that cell, hit enter. Okay, so we've kind of got it set up. And then the next step is that whatever we have as our balance at the end of the first year becomes our principal for the second year. So now I click in principal, I hit equals, and I click on that, the balance from the previous year. And if I hit enter, now that goes into the second year as my starting principal. Okay. All right, so from there you'd probably think to yourself, now I can just fill down my formulas like that, and like that, and like that, and it should work fine, but it's not actually, because now I look at it, something's gone very, very, very wrong here. And I need to work out what it is. So, and this is the problem. The one thing that's wrong here is that when you fill a formula down, the formula has what's called an absolute reference. So for example, this formula here equals D2, which I filled down, basically just tells this cell that the value it's going to put here is the one that was in the balance cell in the balance column in the row above. So it always goes, well, it always says to itself, what value has to go here? Well, go to the previous row, go to the balance column, and that's what goes in there, all right? And that works perfectly fine. But the problem is when we get to our interest rate, right? So for our interest rate, for our first one, it's looking in this cell here. If we fill it down, in the next row, it doesn't look in this cell, it looks in the one below it, which is 10,000, which is why I got a weird answer there. And then for the next row down, it looks in this cell, which is just blank, which is why we've got 00000 here. So the problem here is we don't want it to look, when we fill it down, we don't want it to look in the next cell down as we go down each row. We want it to look in the same cell every single time. So we have to create what's called an absolute reference. An absolute reference will tell this formula, even when we fill it down, that it always has to look in the cell F2, where my cursor is here, to get the interest rate, because the interest rate is going to be the same for every single calculation. So the way I do an absolute reference, as I've kind of shown in this example here, is where I have the address of that cell where the interest rate is. If I want it to always look in that same cell, I put a $sign in front of the F, a $sign in front of the 2, and now I've transform that into an absolute reference. So even if I fill my formula down, when it comes to the interest rate part, the formula will always look in the same cell F2. So now if I hit enter on that and fill that down, there we go. So now it works properly. Now each year the interest rate gets a little bit bigger because the principal, the amount we had from the previous year, gets a little bit bigger as well. So now we have answers that look reasonable. So just repeat that, because this is one of the tricky concepts people always struggle with. When you fill a formula down, every reference in that formula, by reference we mean telling it to look in a particular cell, moves down each row as you fill it down. If you want it to look in the same cell, even when you fill your formula down, you have to use one of these absolute references, which means putting $signs in front of the letter and the number part of the cell address. Okay? So definitely have a practice at constructing a spreadsheet like this, because this is the one thing in Excel or Google Sheets that people always seem to really, really, really struggle with.